Today we're going to be learning Sukkah Daf Yudalit. To start, we're going to go back a little bit into what we saw in yesterday's daf. So we started talking about with this law of Yadot. Okay, just to clarify what Yadot are handles for fruits or something like that. And what the laws are, number one, if it's serving a fruit is food, it's something that's mekabel tum'ah, it's susceptible to impurity. If it has a handle and the handle is serving the fruit, then the handle will also be susceptible to impurity. And as well, if the yad becomes tameh, then the fruit becomes. If the fruit becomes tameh, the yad also becomes tameh, even if, not necessarily both of them became impure. But if, on the other hand, we're going to say that if this yad is not serving the fruit, then we don't have any purpose for it, then it's not susceptible to impurity. So the whole question we saw was some machloket about what Rav Huna said, either Rabbi Abba or Rav Menashe, was about if you put we saw botzer lagat, you put the grapes in the wine press, both Rabbi Abba and Rabbi Menashe agree that Rav Huna said at that point the yad is no longer, we don't want it anymore. It's actually bad for the wine because it will absorb the wine. But Rav Menashe said, in addition, also when it comes to a few other cases, he said specifically in the case of putting up, if we cut the stalks of grain to put on the schach, already we don't need the yad anymore. Berwis, right, which is what's holding the grain in place. So now, there's the stalk, there's the part that holds the grain, and then there's the grain itself, the seed. So now we're going to talk about this machloket. We're going to say, is this a source of debate among a Tanaitic source? We saw that. We said, according to Rabbi Abba, the only way to read this source, again, let's just look at the source. We're on Daf Yud Gimel, about 15 lines from the 12 or 13 lines from the bottom. So chay te'enim u'behem te'enim, parkilim u'behem anavim, kashim u'behem shibolim, all these different leaves with something on them. Okay, I won't get into all the details. Kulam im psolet, merubeh al ochling kshera. We look only at the psolet, the stuff that's going to be thrown away, and the food itself. We don't look at the yadot. The yadot are already not significant. I'm skipping a little. According to the Achirim, we do consider it. So now they suggest that, let's say, Rabbi Abba fits in. He says when it comes to kashim, the grains, we consider the yadot as part of it, whereas we don't for we won't in the wine press only, but here we would. Whereas according to Rabbi Menashe, we wouldn't there either. So according to Rabbi Abba, we'd have to say it's a machloket tanaim, but then we said, according to Rabbi Menashe, maybe it's not a Tanaitic debate. Maybe the case is that you cut them for the purposes of eating, and that's why the yad isn't canceled, according to Achirim, not because you're using it for schach, but you first designated it as food. So when you cut it, you had in mind for food. Therefore, the yad was significant. Only over time, you changed your mind and you decided to use it for schach. And then, according to the Achirim, it's still going to be a problem because you can't just because you change your mind doesn't mean that you can cancel the law of yad. Yad is still significant. And according to Tanakama, since you changed your mind, you canceled your original intent and therefore you shifted. But however, there's a problem with this. What's the problem? The problem is we ended yesterday with machshava does not work to cancel what you already originally did. So you cut it for the purposes of food. You can't just cancel the law of yadot because of that. It doesn't work that way. Okay, and now we're going to do a review, okay, which is the Gemara is giving us a review. We're going to start on the second line of today's daf. It says here, Ma'aseh motzi miyad ma'aseh u'miyad machshava. An action can change its status from one thing to another. But either you can designate something by machshava or you can designate it by doing an action. We're going to see exactly what an action is. An action has to be changing the object, not just doing some minor action. So your intent, okay, we're going to see ma'aseh, if I do an action and I change something entirely, that can change it from either I designated it by ma'aseh or I designated originally. Its original designation was by action or by thought, right? I just said, I'm going to use this for X purpose. How can I uproot either a machshava or a maaseh? I can uproot it only by an action. But machshava ina motzia lo miya ma'aseh v'lo miya machshava. But if I originally took something, and it doesn't matter whether I designated it in my thoughts alone or I designated it by action, if now I want to take my intent and change it in my mind, or we'll see later by a minor action, that does not work. Okay, you can't. This is very interesting in the context of the whole, in Shas in general, in the Gemara, there's many, many sugyot that deal with intention. How much does intention play a role? When it comes to Shabbat, we learned about davar she'eino mitkaven. If I don't intend it, then it's not melechet machshevet. It's not forbidden by the Torah. And there's a machloket. Is it mutar? Is it asur midor Rabbanit? Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Shimon. But I'm sorry, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Shimon. But there's this issue of intent is important there. Pigul, sacrifices, we said intent is important. When it comes to damages, intention is not important. Adam u'ad la'olam, a person is always responsible, bein er, bein yashem, whether he's asleep, whether he's awake, whether he intended, whether he didn't intend. Doesn't matter what your intention is, you're always responsible. So where does machshava fall into place when it comes to creating, right? So what we said is to create the status of tuma, it can say, I'm using this for X purpose. That is enough. But when we want to change its status, machshava is not significant. Now comes the suggestion of the Gemara. Maybe that's only utensils that have significance. But maybe yadot, the whole law of yadot is not actually, it's not tameh because it has significance. It has secondary significance. It's only significant because of the fruit. So when it comes to regular laws of fruits and utensils, which are themselves makabel tumah because they themselves have significance, then machshava is not going to work. But maybe with this law of yad, which is just an accessory, right? It's serving the fruit. Maybe that law will be a little bit different. Maybe we'll be more lenient with that. And maybe we could say that machshava would work to uproot its intent. And then again, this was all to prove that Rav Menashe can say that Tanaitic source was because it was a case where I changed the intent. I originally cut it for food, and that's why Acherim think that it retains the status of yadot, or susceptible to impurity. But again, yadot are handles, right? The stem here. But the Tanakama thinks, no, I changed my intent. Now I don't need the yad anymore. The yad is no longer significant, which means it's no longer susceptible to impurity, which maybe could be done by my thoughts alone because it's just yad. It's just a secondary thing. But now we're going to have an issue with that. Hatnan, it says in the Mishnah, Kol yadot ha'ochlin shebisisan begoren teorot. All handles of food that were bisisan in the threshing floor are pure. We don't know what bisisan is. Then it says in parentheses here, which we'll deal with later, parentheses really means don't read it, but I'll read it anyway. Rabbi Yossi mitameh. There happens to be a machloket here right now. We're not focusing on the debate. We're just talking about the first opinion. Bishlam alaman damar bisisan means it makes sense according to the one who says, and this will all fit with our theory that there is a difference of yadot, that machshava is enough. If you say that bisisan is hitir ogdan, is you just untie them, then shapir, then it makes sense because untying is not really an action. An action has to be to actually change it. You didn't change anything by untying it. What did you show? You showed your intent that by untying it, I no longer need the yad. What's the purpose of the yad? To hold it. If I'm untying it, I don't want to carry it anymore. The whole idea is I tied it, I bound it in order to carry it. Here, I don't need to carry it anymore. I'm showing that by untying it, but it's really more like a machshava. I didn't change anything. So then what does it say? If bisisan, I did this very small action, which is like intent, just in my thoughts alone, tehorot, it no longer is susceptible to impurity. Ella, lemanda amar, bisisan mamash, but the one who says that bisisan is actually crushing them, which is an action. Only if I crush them are they tehorot, do they no longer are susceptible to impurity. Then then it's clear that you need an action and machshava is not enough. And then we're back to square one, that we can't necessarily say that Rav Menashe could explain both according to his interpretation. So therefore they would say, mamash, right? So here also it would be, so here's the answer, sorry. The answer is, mamash. Let's go back and understand that Braita, where he said, Tanakama said, the kashim, right? Kashim kashin ubahem shibolim, in all the other cases. If the psolet's mubal ochlin kasher, what was the case? So we first said maybe the case is he cut it for the purposes of eating and then decided to use it for schach. But he also crushed it. Then we'd say, he did an action, he crushed it. We could say that case is also where he crushed it, where he actually did an action to show, I don't plan to use it as food anymore. So then they say, wait a minute. If you actually crushed it and you did a maaseh to show, I don't want this attached anymore, this yad, right? What crushing, you're basically detaching the yad. You're saying, not that you don't want it for food, you don't need the handle anymore to carry it because you crushed it. So now they say, wait a minute. My time I would acherim. Then acherim makes absolutely no sense. Why would acherim think that we still count the yad if you actually crush them? So they say, no, they could. De Amar Rabbi Yossi. Remember, there was a machloket there about Rabbi Yossi and the rabbis. Ditnan, as it says in the Mishnah there, Rabbi Yossi mitameh. Rabbi Yossi says it's impure even though you crushed it, really crushed it. So Haimai. So wait a minute. Bishlama, what would be the reason why he would still count the yad even though you crushed it? Well, Bishlama hatam tama de Rabbi Yossi. The reason why we're now going to say, even if Rabbi Yossi is mitami there, he still wouldn't be mitami here because they're two different cases. There, what does he say? You still, even though you crush them, you still want them attached. For what reason? Now we're talking, you're on the threshing floor. What do you normally do? You thresh, right? You trample on it. Then you winnow it and you throw everything up in the air. And then what happens is the chaff blows away, the wheat falls into a pile, and you've separated everything. So now how do you do that? Chazia, the yadot are still needed. Why? Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, as Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish said. Ta'amar Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, he said, Ho'ilu ruyot lehofchan be'eter. Since when you use, there's this pitchfork they would use. It's basically a two-pronged fork. That was a big thing that they would use on the winnowing floor. On the threshing floor to winnow. They would stick it under all the grains of wheat. They would throw it up in the air, and that's how the wind would blow it away. For that, you actually still want it attached to the yad, because if it's not attached to the yad, you can't throw up the grain. The grain will fall right through the pitchfork. Imagine a big two-pronged pitchfork. Everything's going to fall. You're not going to actually succeed in throwing everything up in the air. So you crush it so that the outer layer that's covering the yad, basically that's covering the grain, loosens up, but you still want it somewhat attached. You could throw it all up, and then again, that will all blow away, all the chaff. But by us, once you crush it and you want to put it as schach on your sukkah, you don't need the grains anymore. So they say, and you don't need the yad really to hold the grain in place. So they say, well, it's a little hard to understand the reality here, but what they claim is that when you take apart your sukkah, it's actually easier to take it apart and take the schach off by holding onto the grain, because the straw is very loose or light, and the grain is heavier. It's easier to hold it over there where it's attached. Therefore, you do still want it attached for some reason. It still has some purpose, and that's why the dissenting opinion says that it's actually still impure. So you could actually explain it all that way, in which case, according to Rabbi Menashe, it's not necessarily machlokat tanaim between him and Rabbi Abba, right? Him and Rabbi Abba are arguing about the same thing these tanaim were arguing about, because you can actually explain the case. Again, you cut it for eating purposes, you changed your mind, you crushed it, but you still wanted it attached. And that's why one opinion says the yad is still significant. The other one says the yad is not significant because it's not really for such a purpose anymore. Now we're going to just kind of relearn this sugya in a bit of a different order. They're going to organize a bunch of the things that we brought in before in a more organized fashion. Gufa. Kol yadot, basically starting from this braita. We want to see this braita, this Mishnah that we just quoted before. Kol yadot ochlin shebesisam begorin toorot, v'Rabbi Yossi mitameh. So now the discussion that we made reference to, we're now going to see inside. My bisisam, what does this mean? Rabbi Yochanan amar bisisan mamash. Rabbi Yochanan is the one who says it really means you crushed it. Rabbi Elazar omer he tirogdan. Rabbi Elazar is the one who says you just open them up. His opinion makes sense. That's what Rabbi Yossi says it's tameh, because you didn't really do an action. If he thinks you really crushed them, right? Why would it be tameh, Rabbi Yossi? Rabbi Yossi. And here we have the answer that we brought. Because you could winnow it with this pitchfork, therefore you want them together, and that's why it's still the yad, the handle is still susceptible to impurity. Amar Rabbi Elazar, Now we're on a total tangent. Since we talked about the eter, they're going to darshan this word in the Torah where it talks about Yitzchak, and he prayed for children with Rivka, right? They both prayed for children. And it says by Ya'ater Yitzchak, he prayed, but it says it in the root of that word is eter, like this pitchfork. So they say, why do they use this same word like a pitchfork? It's a beautiful image here. What does it do? You pick up the wheat and you pick up the stalks of wheat, and what happens? It moves things from place to place, right? It blows it all the way somewhere else. Likewise, the prayers of tzaddikim, of righteous people, can help to turn God's ways, right? God wants to be angry with you about something, can turn him to become compassionate toward you, and use his midah of compassion to basically forgive you. So here there's this idea of how tefillah can change things, right? And it's interesting, is it's all about what is able to change things. The whole sugya was really about how your thoughts can't really change the status when it comes to levels of impurity, right? Susceptibility, impurity. Your thoughts can create susceptibility, impurity, but can't really remove it. Here we're saying when it comes in, is what I was saying is there, how machshava works in different places in different ways. When it comes to prayers, and I would even say, repentance and all that, your thoughts are actually very important, and they have this ability to actually change even the way, right, what God is thinking about you and how he wants to treat you. So it's this incredible power that we have in our intentions to be able to change things. Very beautiful idea. Okay, moving on to the next Mishnah. First of all, we see a lot of machlokot with Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Meir, or Rabbi Yehuda and the rabbis throughout this Masechet. And many times also, we're going to see this later, Rabbi Yehuda brings proofs from real situations that happen, which is also just interesting. And then the rabbis claim, oh no, that's not a good proof because of this and that. So misachim b'nisarim, you can use wooden boards. And wood is, right, flat wood, we said, is not susceptible to impurity. It grows from the ground. Perfect. Of course you can use this. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Meir osir. Rabbi Meir says, no, you cannot. And we don't yet know why, and we don't yet know at what thickness, right? Because obviously we saw before, chavilei etzim, right? You have small pieces of wood, you untie them, it works. So what are we talking about here? We'll have to see. Big machloket Rav and Shmuel about how to understand this. Natan aleha neser, shehu rachav, and we also have to understand why Rabbi Meir forbids. Natan aleha neser, shehu rachav arba'at tvachim. What if you did anyway? Now, this would seemingly be according to Rabbi Meir, who said it's forbidden, but we'll see that maybe it's also according to Rabbi Yehuda, because if you notice, it doesn't say we're still in Rabbi Meir here. So if you put a neser that's 4 tvachim wide, what does this mean? The commentaries assume that what we're talking here is the law of dofen akuma, which means, we've learned this before, it's halacha l'moshe misinai, that if you have disqualified schach, which we're going to assume right now, this 4 tvachim beam is disqualified. But if it's within 4 cubits, which is 24 handbreadths, tvachim, if it's within 24 handbreadths of the wall, then we assume it's a continuation of the wall, and it doesn't disqualify your sukkah, assuming you have enough kosher schach, otherwise of a space of 7 by 7 handbreadths minimum. But the space, and this we didn't talk about last time, we talked about dofen akuma, the space under this dofen akuma is considered under a wall and not under the schach, and therefore you can't, according to the Mishnah, you can't sleep under there, you also can't eat under there, you don't fulfill your mitzvah of sukkah under there, but it also doesn't ruin your sukkah. So you can have the rest of your sukkah can be kasher. This spot will be pasul, because it's right, that spot you can't use, but it doesn't mess up the rest of your sukkah. Whereas if you had this 4 handbreadth schach, disqualified schach in the middle of your sukkah, again, according to Rabbi Meir, or maybe even according to Rabbi Yehuda, we'll have to see, it will disqualify your entire sukkah. Only if it's in the side do we view this as a dofen akuma. Once you have a makom chashuv, remember we talked about 4 tvachim is an important space. Once you have an important space in your sukkah of disqualified schach, it ruins your sukkah unless it's dofen akuma. It's near the wall. If it's near the wall, we just view it as a continuation of the wall. And then again, that whole space will not be usable, but it won't mess up the rest of your sukkah. Amar Rav. Okay, by the way, I forgot to mention that Daf Mishalahem this week is all about this halacha of taseh v'lo min ha'asui. In what cases taseh v'lo min ha'asui is relevant, and in what other halachot does it come up? besides tzitzit that we saw. It comes up in a few other places, also by lulav we saw. Comes up also by mezuzah. And if your Hebrew is good, then you can listen to Daf Shalahem this week. You can find on Facebook or on our site, on the Hebrew side of our site, about more in depth into Taseh v'lo min ha'asui, this idea that you have to build the sukkah and you can't take something that's already been made for some other purpose. You have to build the schach yourself. Again, we talked about it at the beginning of class yesterday, some other details of it. They also get more into depth about it. Amarav. Now we get into Machloket Rav and Shmuel about how to understand this Mishnah. Machloket b'nisarim sheyesh behen arba'ah. Rabbi Meir eat legzerat tikra, Rabbi Yehuda lay legzerat tikra. The machloket is about beams that are 4 tfachim wide. Okay, that's what we assume, right? Even if it's 4 tfachim wide, Rabbi Yehuda still says it's okay. At that length, Rabbi Meir will say it's disqualified. And that's because of gzerat tikra. What is gzerat tikra? Gzerat tikra is very similar to gzerat otzar. If you have these 4 tfachim wide beams that are significant beams, what are the roofs of their house made of? Also beams. When you sit in your house, you look up and you see these beams on the ceilings and the way their houses were. Therefore, if you sit in your sukkah and you see these beams, you might think, oh, you know what? I can just use my house as a sukkah and use the beams that are already in my house. And that will be a problem. This I mentioned, taseh v'lo min ha'asui, be a problem of taseh v'lo min ha'asui, right? You can't just use beams that are up there already. So you might think that you can, and therefore they forbade these beams. Midrabanan, okay? They're a problem. The Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yehuda's not worried that you're going to confuse your house with your sukkah and think, oh, I could just live in my house. Why would you think that? Right? Again, we keep having this idea of people will be lazy. Maybe they won't want to build a sukkah, so they'll just take their house and use it because they'll say, oh, look, I have schach already built in. I'll just use it. So we don't want people to do that. But Rabbi Yehuda's not worried that because you have these beams in your sukkah, you'll confuse that and think I can use my house as my sukkah. Aval b'nisarim she'ein behen arba'ah. But what if it's less than 4? So then, according to Rav, divrei hakol kshera. Everybody thinks that this is a kosher sukkah. No problem. Ushmuel amar b'she'ein behen arba'ah machloket. Shmuel disagrees and says, no. Less than 4, there's a debate. Aval yesh behen arba'ah divrei hakol psula. Even Rabbi Yehuda will think once you have a beam that's 4 tefachim wide, of course you can't have a sukkah like that. That really looks like your house. And he would still say it's a problem. So that's the machloket. Very basic machloket. We're going to see it again. So let's just review. Rav says, less than 4, everyone agrees it's fine. At 4 is the debate. Shmuel says, at 4, everyone agrees it's a problem. Less than 4, it's a debate. So now, first they question Shmuel. They say, what? Less than 4, how much less than 4? Even 1 tefach? Even, right? Even a very thin piece of wood. Those are just reeds. When you can use reeds. A very small piece of wood is like a reed. Of course, you can use that as schach. So what are you talking about? So now Rav Papa modifies Shmuel and he says, Yesh behen arba'ah divrei hakol psula, pachot mishlosha divrei hakol kshera. If it has 4, everyone agrees it's a problem. If it has less than 3, everyone agrees it's okay. The debate is 3 to 4. Okay? My timer. Okay, so why is less than 3 not a problem? Because it's just a reed. The machloket is between 3 and 4. This goes back to, again, what's our important measurement here? Is it 4 tvachim, which signifies significant space, as we saw in Eruvin, for example? Then, since it has shiur makom, lo gazlina, right? Because it doesn't yet have shiur makom chashuv. It's not yet at 4. It's between 3 and 4. Rabbi Yehuda says there's no reason to make a gzera. And Rabbi Meir thinks, no, there still is. Right? Marsa, what does Rabbi Meir think? Marsavar kevan denafkalu mitorat levud gazlina. What's the significance of 3 tvachim? Once it's 3 tvachim, it no longer has that law of levud. Remember, anything less than 3 is as if it's not. So anything less than 3 is fine. Once it's above 3, it already has somewhat of significance. It's not significant like makom chashuv, but it still has significance because it's no longer levud. And therefore, remember, levud is anything less than 3. We view it as if, let's say it's above 3 less than 3 off the ground. We're going to assume it's on the ground. So less than 3 is not significant, but 3 does have somewhat of significance. That's significant enough for Rabbi Meir to think the Gzera Tikra kicks in. Okay. But if 4, they all agree it's a problem. So now we're going to have a few things that are going to work with Shmuel and not really work with Rav. So again, Shmuel says at 4, they all agree that it's forbidden. So Bishlama de Shmuel de Amar b'she'em behen arba'a machloket, aval yesh behen arba'a divrei kol psula. Shmuel, who says it's between 3 and 4 that there's a machloket, but after 4, everyone agrees it's disqualified. Mishum hachi lo yishan taktav. Well, the end of our Mishnah makes perfect sense then. Remember, we said the end of our Mishnah, it wasn't clear who it goes according to. It kind of sounded like it was everybody. Now we would say like this. Natan ala neser shura chavar ba'at tvachim, which according to everyone is forbidden, a beam that's 4 tvachim. So then it says, right, the sukkah is not disqualified because it's within 4 cubits of the wall. Dofen akuma, but right, a crooked wall, right, it means your wall kind of goes on an angle, but you can't sleep under it because it's disqualified. So Mishnah, that's why you can't sleep under it. Elel Rav amar b'sheyesh ben arba'a machloket, aval ein ben arba'a divrei kol kshera. But according to Rav, who says if 4 is the machloket, Rabbi Yehuda doesn't even think it's forbidden at 4. So Rabbi Yehuda, Amai yishan tachtav. So why, according to Rabbi Yehuda, can't you sleep under that? You should be able to. It's totally fine. It's part of your schach. It's kosher schach. So what do they answer? Very simply, according to Rav Misavar Divrei Akoli. Who's to say that last line is according to everybody? Seifa Atan the Rabbi Meir. You could say that line is only according to Rabbi Meir, which is what we suggested when we read the Mishnah. Second source that's going to also start off as saying this makes a lot more sense according to Shmuel. This one's a little more complicated. Shnei stinim mitzdarfim. Okay, 2. If you have sheets are problematic. Okay, but schach pasul in the middle of a sukkah, if you have 4 tvachim wide schach that's pasul, it ruins your whole sukkah. If it's on the side, as we said, close, right, within 24 tvachim or 4 amot of the wall, then it's not a problem. But if it's in the middle of your sukkah, anything 4 tvachim wide is going to ruin your sukkah. Less than 4 tvachim, we can view it as if, right, it's okay. It depends on the scenario, but let's just say as a rule right now. So what do they say here? If you have 2 sheets, okay, they're less than 4, we assume. They can join together to create this 4 tvachim space of disqualified sukkah. If you put 2 strips of sheets next to each other, they'll be mitzdarfim. But shnei nisarim, but 2 boards do not join together. Rabbi Meir Omer, af nisarim kistinim. Nisarim have the same law of stimim, and you can put these 2 wooden boards together to get to your requisite amount that will make it a problem. So let's try to figure this out. Now, the assumption here is Tanakama's Rabbi Yehuda. Bishlama l'shmuel da'amar b'she'em behen arba'a machloket, aval yesh behen arba'a divrei kol psula. If everyone agrees that at 4 tvachim it's a problem, this makes perfect sense. My mitzdarfim la'arba'a. So what does it mean mitzdarfim? It means they together work to get to the requisite amount of 4 tvachim, which everyone agreed is forbidden. So Rabbi Yehuda, the Tanakama, says, you can't join these 2 separate boards. 2 separate boards, 2 plus 2 does not equal 4 here. We're not going to add them together to get to the 4 problematic tvachim. According to Rabbi Meir, we do view them as joining together and they can make up the 4 requisite amount. But which means that if 4, Rabbi Yehuda doesn't forbid it at all. So and if, the machloket is between 3 and 4. But if they I said it wrong. At 4, there's a machloket, but less than 4 divrei kol kshera. So now what's this case and what's the mitzdarfin? Let's try to figure it out. If they have 4 tvachim, these beams, then according to Rabbi Meir, it's forbidden at 4. You don't need to have it joined with another board beam. It's already a problem. And according to Rabbi Yehuda, it wouldn't be a problem. But and then again, Rabbi Yehuda wouldn't make sense either because they're not mitzdarfim, they're not even usher. And even if it added up to 4, it would be forbidden. So why would you even need to talk about joining together? If it doesn't have 4, then what's the problem? They're just reeds because less than 4, everyone agrees it's okay to use in your sukkah. So why would we join them together? This is just different beams and all the beams are fine. So what would be the issue? So what do they answer? Here we're going to explain it according to Rav. They really do have 4. And I'm going to already say that this answer is a little bit problematic. The Achronim kind of ask about it and give possible answers to explain. I'm just going to explain and raise the question. I'm not going to answer the question today, but my mitzdarfim la'arba amot min atzad. What it means here is if you have 4 tvachim wide beams but they're on the side of your sukkah. So there's a law of dofen akuma. If they continue and they pass that line of the 4 cubits, right? Let's say you had 6 of them and you got to 24 and then you add a 7th. That one is considered in the middle of the sukkah and will mess up your sukkah. That's what it means, mitzdarfim. Okay, now, and according to Rabbi Yehuda, a mitzdarfim because it's not even a problem. Okay, now it's a little bit tricky because let's say, what's the issue of tseruf here? Why is tseruf important? If you had that beam in the middle of your sukkah, and even if you didn't have all those beams on the side, that were problematic beams, but they were dofen akuma, it would still mess up your sukkah because it's in the middle of your sukkah, and a 4 tvachim wide beam in the middle of your sukkah would be a problem. That's the problem with this answer, but I'll leave that problem aside. Let's just assume they came up with some way to explain it, even if it's a little bit difficult. So mitzdarfim means that if you've gotten past the 4 cubit measurement with this beam, this will mess up your sukkah because it's a problematic beam. Lishnachrina. Now we're going to have a different way of reading this whole bringing in of the source connected to the machlok of Rav and Shmuel. Again, this fits in with Shmuel, but now we're going to say for a different reason. Why? Let's just continue. That again, at 4, less than 4, between 3 and 4 is the machloket. But at 4, everyone agrees it's disqualified. My mitzdarfim. Now we're going to give Rav's answer. According to this, mitzdarfim la'arba amot min hatzad. Now here we assume that they mean the beams are less than 4, and the question is, are they going to join with the other ones to kind of, you've passed the border of the dofen akuma line, and now do they join together to say this is a 4 tvachim beam? Maybe it's possible that what we mean is that the 4 tvachim beam is partially in the dofen akuma section and partially out, and maybe that's what it means. Anyway, it's a little bit unclear. But according to Rav, bishlama l'Rabbi Meir my mitzdarfin la'arba amot min hatzad. Now, according to Rabbi Meir, what does mitzdarfim mean? Mitzdarfim means, as we said before, the arba amot min hatzad. But Rabbi Yehuda damal filu yesh ben arba akshera. But according to Rabbi Yehuda, who thinks less than 4 they're good, and also more than 4 they're good. So my aim mitzdarfim kanim ba'almaninu makes absolutely no sense to say. Rabbi Yehuda makes no sense according to Rav to say these aren't mitzdarfim. Well, there's nothing wrong with them. Why would they need to be mitzdaref with something else? Why would they even theoretically be a problem? He says they're not a problem. They don't join with anything. But why would you even think to say that? So what did they answer? I did kama Rabbi Meir mitzdarfim. Amar Rabbi Yehuda a mitzdarfim. He didn't really need to say it. It's just he was disagreeing with Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir said mitzdarfim, and he says, I not only do I not think mitzdarfim, I don't even think they're usher at all. But he used the language mitzdarfim because again, they're less than 4, and then he doesn't think they're a problem at all. Okay, or even at 4, he doesn't think they're a problem. Okay, so now, Tanya Kavatei de Rav, Tanya Kavatei de Shmuel. We're now going to bring a proof from a Braita for each approach. Tanya Kavatei de Rav, again, Rav said, at 4, there's a machloket, less than 4, everyone agrees it's okay. If you use these wooden boards that don't have 4, everyone agrees they're okay. Yesh behen arba. If they already have 4, Rabbi Meir posel, Rabbi Yehuda machshir. There you have exactly the machloket is at arba. Everyone agrees less than, it's not a problem. Now, since we brought this Braita, we're now going to bring, and I told you already that Rabbi Yehuda is going to try to bring proofs for his opinions with situations, real life situations. So here goes. This doesn't have to do, we already proved Rav from the Braita, but we're bringing the continuation of this Braita. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, ma'aseh b'shat sakana, there was a case where there was a dangerous situation, meaning the Gentiles in the area didn't want us to put up sukkahs. So what did they do? We brought beams that had 4, meaning it looked like I was just building in addition to my merpeset, my porch. So we put these beams on top of the porch, and we sat under them, and then they didn't realize that we were doing this for sukkah. So there's my proof. If 4 tvachim beams didn't work, we wouldn't have been able to do a sukkah in that way. So what's their obvious response? You want to prove it from there? The whole thing of the beams is gzerah de Rabbanit, that you don't confuse it and think your house could be a sukkah, which normal years we're going to keep that gzerah. But if we can't build a sukkah and the only way to do it is to put these beams up on your pesach in a way that it doesn't look like a sukkah, which if you put these 4 wide beams, doesn't look like a sukkah, so it just looks like part of your house, then we're going to allow it in a year like that because otherwise there's no other way to fulfill the mitzvah. So you can't prove it from there. Now we're going to bring the Braita, as we said, we're going to bring a Braita to support Shmuel. Tanya Kavatei de Shmuel. If you put up beams of wood that have 4, everyone agrees they're problematic. That's exactly Shmuel. If they don't have 4, then Rabbi Meir posel, Rabbi Yehuda machshir. This Braita says machloket, the way Shmuel describes the machloket. Again, we're going to have another case here, and this case is going to be a little difficult. We're going to explain it much more so when we get to understanding it in a few dapim. We'll see it more in depth. Rabbi Meir sheim yesh ben neser leneser kimelo neser. If you have, let's say, 4 tefachim wide beams, but then you have 4 tefachim wide spaces, sheminiach psal benehem ukshera, that you can put kosher schach in the empty spaces that are equal to the problematic spaces, and your sukkah will be kshera. Again, we're going to see this later. They explain this in a bit of a different way, and you can see the picture in the picture book, which is, what it means here is, all the beams are actually on the sides, dofen akuma, they're within 24 handbreadths, or 4 cubits from the wall. And then you have this strip of 8 tefachim, 8 handbreadths in the middle of the sukkah. It's talking about a sukkah that's 48 by 48. So you have 20 on one side of disqualified schach, 20 on the other side of disqualified, which again, disqualified, yeah, it's strips of 4 good, 4 not good, 4 good, 4 not good, etc. Or you could start with the not good, it doesn't matter, but it's all within the 24 handbreadths from the wall, so it's all dofen akuma. In the center, you actually have good kosher schach, and that's the case that they're talking about here, because 4 tefachim in the middle of a sukkah would actually disqualify your entire sukkah. So it would have to be that in the middle of your sukkah was all kosher schach. Okay, well, we'll get more in depth into that case when we get to it. Here, it's just quoted because it's the end of that Braita. Umode Rabbi Yehuda, the Braita continues and says, and Rabbi Yehuda agrees, she'im natan aleha neser shu rachav arba'at tefachim kshera, that if you had one that was 4 tefachim wide, it would be okay, meaning it wouldn't disqualify your sukkah because of dofen akuma. Ve'ein yeshenim tachtav, but you can't sleep under it. If you slept under that beam, you wouldn't fulfill your mitzvah sukkah, because again, that's just considered part of the wall and not part under your schach. Itmar. Now we're going to have the last case for today is, what if I took that 4 tefachim beam? Okay, we're going to assume now we're holding like either Rabbi Meir, that it's a problem, or we're holding like Shmuel, who thinks that everyone thinks that 4 tefachim one is a problem. And now instead of putting it, right, we assume it's 4 tefachim long, wide, but the thickness of it is probably less. Let's say it's 1 tefach thick. So if you turn it on its side and you put it instead of flat, the way a board of a roof would be, a ceiling, but if you turn it on its side, it will be very narrow. So can you put all these boards as schach turned on their sides? So let's see. Itmar. So it was said, Havchan al tzidehem. Rav Huna Amar Psula. Rav Huna disqualified it. Rav Chisda ve'Rabba bar Rav Huna, the son of Rav Huna Rabba, and Rav Chisda says Shera. They thought it was okay. Ikla, now we're going to have a story. Ikla Rav Nachman l'Sula. He came to Sula. U'legabe Rav Chisda ve'Rabba bar Rav Huna. So Rav Chisda and Rabba Rav Huna go in and specifically ask them this question. Obviously, they were a little troubled by it. They knew they disagree with Rav Huna. So they decided to ask Rav Nachman what he thinks. Amruleh, they said to him, what if you turn it on its side? Is it okay? Amar lihu, psula, it's disqualified. Why? It's like poles of metal. Now, poles of metal are problematic because they're not susceptible to, they are susceptible to impurity, and they don't grow from the ground. So therefore, what do we say here? These are no different from any sort of pasal schach. In other words, the rabbi said, 4 tefachim wide beams are problematic. It doesn't matter how you put them in. Yes, they're problematic because if you put them in, it looks like a roof, but it doesn't matter at that point what the reason is. The point is, at this point, they're determined to be, or decided that it was pasul schach, disqualified. Doesn't matter how you put it. You could put it on an angle, on this. It doesn't make a difference if it looks like a roof anymore. The fact is, they pasul this. This is now what we call schach pasul. Any way you put it, it's going to be a problem. So it seems that after hearing that, it changed their mind. So now Rav Huna gets a little bit upset. Amar lehu Rav Huna, lo amri lechu amri kapate. Did I not tell you that Rav Nachman was going to say like me? Meaning, I told you I was right. Amruleh, they said to him, Umi amar lamar tam avelo kablina mine. It's not like you explained yourself. It's what they're pointing out, that Rav Nachman gave a reason, and once they had a reason, they understood. Before, Rav Huna just said it, and they just didn't understand why he said it. So now that we got a reason, I specifically, when Rav Huna gave his reason, gave his opinion, I didn't explain the reason because I wanted you to kind of live this situation as they did. First, they just heard it. They had no idea what the reason was. So they didn't really get it. So they say to him, look, if you had explained your reason, we would have accepted your opinion, but we had no idea why you said what you said. So what does he, of course, say to them? Amar lahu, did you ask me for a reason and I didn't give it to you? Had you asked me, I would have been happy to tell you. Now here we have sort of two different approaches about education. Rav Huna clearly thought that you teach people by just telling them and having them learn all the halachot. Later you can ask questions, but first accept the halacha. Know that this is the case. Later you can ask your questions. But Rav Chisda and Rabbi Bar Rav Huna said, no, we want to understand. We can't accept an answer or something unless we understand what it is. Reminds me when my kids were little, I used to go to the doctor all the time, and the doctor would always make fun of me because every time he'd say something, I'd ask him, I want to understand, what is this and where does it come from? What does it mean? What are the ramifications? And he would always kind of laugh a little bit at me, like, why are you asking so many questions? I told you this is what you're supposed to do. Just do it, right? And I'm the kind of person, I guess that's why I like learning Gemara. You want to understand where it comes from, what it means. It makes more sense when you can understand things. You can accept things. If you don't understand it, it's very hard to just blankly, listen without really understanding. And that's the way Rabbi Bar Rav Huna and Rav Chisda were. They wanted to really understand. However, there is another approach to saying, if you ask questions, you're never going to get anywhere. You're never going to learn anything. You're just going to be stuck asking questions all the time and delving in depth without actually getting all the information. So better to get all the information first, then you can start delving more in depth and getting your explanations. So it's interesting. This one ends off with my attitude, which is, better off understanding what you understand. Okay. So now last thing for today, lema mesayale. Let's try to bring a proof for Rav Huna that even putting it on its side is a problem from the following source. We're going to have three cases of a sukkah. One is it's too small. It doesn't hold the bare minimum of your head, most of your body, and your table, like Beit Shammai. This is our 3 tvachim levud law, which is the bottom of your wall doesn't go all the way down to the ground, and it's more than 3 tvachim off the wall, in which case a little goat can come through into your sukkah. That's not a wall anymore. It's a breached wall. And here's our case. You put on a beam that's 4 tvachim wide, even though it only took up a space of 3 tvachim. Now, what could that possibly be? Right. And then psula. All these cases are disqualified sukkahs. So hechidami, what's the last case? Lav kigon shapchanal tidehem, must be it was 4 tvachim long, but 3 tvachim thick. So when you turned it on its side, it only took up a space of 3 tvachim, and yet it's still pasul, and that would prove Rav Huna. But the Gemara rejects this and says, lo, and you knew because it's a lema mesayale. Lema is always a suggestion that's going to be rejected. Sayeh means to help, right? Let's say that this Braita supports Rav Huna's opinion. No, you could say that this is something else. You put it at the end of a sukkah. Okay. Imagine you have a sukkah with 3 walls. Your 4th wall is open. Okay, your 4th side is open, I should say. You don't have a 4th wall. Your sukkah, now your schach, you put on a beam that's 4 tvachim wide, but 3 of it is in the sukkah. Okay, we'll read that now. You put it on the opening of the sukkah. 3 tvachim of it is inside. But 1 tefach is outside. So you have a beam of 4 tvachim, but only 3 tvachim of that is in your sukkah. So you might have thought it's okay, but it's not going to be okay. And now we'll see why. This halach of psal is like psolet, like we saw the psolet of the goren and the yakev, which was the stuff that actually isn't food, and you can use it as schach. This case that they're quoting is actually where we use this law as a kula, as to make it the halacha easier, better for you. But our sukkah is going to use it to make your sukkah disqualified, to disqualify it. But let's say I have a sukkah and my schach juts out outside the sukkah. So it goes over that open wall, right? The open space. We're on that 4th side. If I'm sitting under the schach, since the schach is connected to the sukkah, I'm actually fulfilling my mitzvah of sukkah. So if your schach juts out, we consider it as part of the sukkah. That's what it says here. It's like a sukkah. Therefore, we're going to use it also l'chumra, to be stringent, which is if I have this 4 tvachim beam, this 4 tvachim wide beam, we're going to say that since, even though part of it is outside the sukkah, but since if I sat under that part, I'd actually fulfill my mitzvah of sukkah. Therefore, we look at the whole beam as if it's 4 tvachim, and therefore it disqualifies your sukkah, right? According to those who say that 4 tvachim wide is a problem, as we saw, right? Shmuel, everyone according to Shmuel, or according to Rav, only Rabbi Meir. But in any case, this would disqualify your sukkah, and therefore this source has absolutely nothing to do with turning it on its side, which is what we were trying to find proof for. But this will finish for today. Have a great day. We'll start with the new Mishnah tomorrow.